Well, good morning. Oh, perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our third Firme Role Model series that we're doing. So I'm excited to be here and to present these phenomenal mujeres that are going to go ahead and talk to us about their journey, specifically in higher education. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and read both of their bios. And then from that, we're going to go ahead and move into our questions. And so I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I'm able to highlight our speakers first so folks can know who's in the room. Am I able to do that? Perfect. So let me go ahead and, actually, Maddie, are you? Oh, perfect. There we go. I'm now co-host, so I can go ahead and do this. So I want to make sure that I spotlight for everyone, the folks that are going to be here with us. So bear with me as we add our phenomenal speakers. So I have the privilege of reading the bios. So I'm gonna start with Brenda. Brenda Rojas currently works as the scheduling analyst for the Office of the Registrar and is completing a master's in education in international higher education. Her work in higher education is influenced by her identity, cultural background, experiences, and in learning the importance of owning her own story. She is originally from San Bernardino, California, and moved to the area to attend UC Merced. After graduating, she began a contract position with UC Merced and decided that higher education was the right career field. As a first-generation college student, she, like other students, had a hard transition and understands that school can be difficult path with many difficulties for marginalized students. Brenda wants to use her own experiences to inform her work and better support students on campus. So I'm super excited and I'm happy that I've had the opportunity to work with Edith in other cultural spaces. So I'm excited that you're here. And then our next guest speaker is going to be Edith Ramirez, has served as a Guardian Scholars Program Coordinator, which provides services for scholars that experience the foster care system and/or homelessness since November 2017. This academic year, she will also be overseeing the Underground Scholars Initiative that will provide support services for scholars that have experienced the criminal justice system and/or have been impacted by it via family members or loved ones. Edith was raised in Snelling, California, a tiny town near UC Merced, which is great because I think you're the first person I've ever met from that small town. She identifies as a first-generation college student and professional from a working-class immigrant family. Edith is also a proud alum of California State University Stanislaus, where she earned a bachelor's in sociology. Edith also received her master's degree in sociology from the University of Nevada, Reno. Prior to joining UC Merced, Edith served as a part-time sociology lecturer in California State University Stanislaus, where she taught personality in society and race and ethnic relations. During her time as a graduate student, Edith conducted research that looked at the role that culture plays in eating disorders among Latinas. She also served as a graduate intern for the TRIO Scholars Program that supports low-income first-generation scholars. During this time, she also supported the implementation of a literacy program in K through third grade opportunity youth. On her free time, Edith enjoys binge watching on Netflix and watching Law and Order SVU with her cat Smokey. She also enjoys listening and dancing to banda music and taking walks with her new puppy, Cinco. So thank you and welcome for being here, both of you. And so similar to what we've done in the past, what we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be asking you some questions, and then we will go ahead and hear one response, and then I'll move over to our next guest. And so we did, before we started this, Brenda is going to be our first person. So I'm going to ask you our first question, Brenda. So what were your experiences growing up how did your identity impact your career decisions? So if you want to share anything about your cultural background or growing up in San Bernardino, would be great.
Yes, so both my parents were born in Mexico and they immigrated here in their late teens and early 20s. So I grew up in San Bernardino, which has a lot of other immigrant Latinos and Vietnamese people. So I feel like I was not really aware that English was the language other people spoke because I was only used to speaking Spanish and Vietnamese. Well, I don't speak it, but like people in my community do.
Mhm.
And I was also in bilingual classes. So we learned in Spanish all day. So this was in the late 90s when I was going to school. So around third grade, they said, well, like they realized that most of you don't speak English. So we're going to change to English instruction. So I didn't learn English until I was 8. So I feel like that really was confusing for me as a child because I am the oldest and I didn't have a sibling until I was 8. So I was just so confused that other people did not speak the language that I spoke at home or like the languages I was used to. And it really was hard for me to learn how to speak English, and I would get made fun of a lot because they're like, you were born here, how do you not know how to say like world and girl specifically? There were like words that always like my cousins would make fun of me for saying. So I feel like that early experience made me realize how from a young age, if you grew up in certain neighborhoods, whether it's lack of access to education, to resources, money, it really impacts your whole future. Because even to this day, I mispronounce things. I'm used to reading in Spanish, so I read things in English, however, pronounce them in Spanish. Like an example in the office, um, I saw paradigm, and I would say paradigm, and people in my office were like, "What are you saying?" But I think that it's like those little examples now that I'm older that kind of remind me of my family and how even though I love speaking Spanish, I'm glad that I had the opportunity to learn how to speak right Spanish so I could communicate with my family. I am frustrated that from a young age, they really said, most of you are not going to go to college. So we don't care what language you speak. Like, we don't care giving you resources that you need to go into higher education. And I was speaking to another friend that also went to San Bernardino. She moved there in middle school from LA. And we talked about how neither of us knew what we wanted to do after college. We're like, we're going to be a doctor, we're going to be an attorney. Like, we're, like these jobs that our family knew you needed a degree for, but we were like, okay, we're going to do that. And now we both work in higher education. She works at UC San Diego. And it was never a career that I thought was possible until I graduated college. I was a peer advisor during my undergrad for Shaw, because I also graduated from UC Merced. And there's this contract position that opened for the degree audit, like just to help students navigate the new audit system that happened in 2016. So I applied while I figured my life out. I quickly met people like Yesenia and Edith and like all these other amazing women and people of color that I work with. And I said, like, this is the field for me. I want to continue helping students. I want to continue meeting other professionals like by myself and hoping that the staff on campuses continues to change and becoming more diverse. So when students do enter college, they see people like themselves and feel like they could go ask them questions versus how I was feeling as an undergrad, like very lost, like I didn't even know who to ask for career services help. And it's been a nice transition now that I finished my master's too, because I feel like I have a lot more confidence and being able to express myself and tell others that I work with, like, no, you're wrong. Like, this is what our students need. So I'm hoping that if anyone is interested in higher education, that they reach out to people like me and Edith and Yesenia and ask questions. Like, there's so many fields besides just being a doctor, attorney, whatever our parents tell us were our only options. And you do have resources because, we're here.
No, I appreciate you sharing that and talking about the importance of, again, trying to figure it out, right? If, you were the oldest. And so I think sometimes we have a lot of students that, right, college wasn't something that it's generational, right? So they didn't have anybody to look up to. And so then when you are 8 years old, and then the younger folks, again, then you're a role model for not only UC Merced students and, you know, other staff, but also your family. So you're starting that a new legacy, right? So I think that's also phenomenal. And congratulations on completing your degree. I'm
Thank
super
you.
excited for you. And we have a couple of other questions that we'll ask so we can get into more of your experiences. But I think so far you started us on the right path in regards to just some of those struggles that we've experienced, you know, seeing the world through bilingual lenses as well. So that's something that's really significant. And I appreciate you sharing that. So I'm going to move us over to Edith in order for her to kind of share a little bit about her story.
Thank you,
Perfect.
Yesenia. I actually relate to a lot of the stuff that Brenda just mentioned. So I'm as I mentioned in the bio, I'm a first generation college student. My parents also immigrated from Mexico. My parents are both from Zacatecas, Mexico. They immigrated when they were really young. My dad had come to the United States a couple of times, so he had been kind of going back and forth, and then he met my mom and they got married and then they came. I was born in Elko, Nevada, so most of my extended family lives there. I feel like that's where most of my family is, but we moved to California when I was about 5 years old. So I think unlike a lot of people that I meet, I didn't have like my immediate family there. And then even though I grew up in the Central Valley, I grew up in, like you mentioned, in a really small town, not far away from Merced, Snelling, California. But even though Central Valley is like predominantly like Latinx, Hispanic, the town that I grew up in was like the complete opposite. So I feel like I had like this very like unique experience in that way. And it also contributed a lot to, I didn't know the term at that point, but I actually wrote my thesis on occultative stress. So this idea that like your culture, the stress that is caused by the like your culture's idea, and then the one that like the dominant society that you live in. So I feel like that was something that impacted me just growing up in general. Like I grew up within a predominantly, like I said, white community. My dad has worked as a ranch hand, so I grew up in like that ranch sort of like country like lifestyle. So everyone around me, you know, was listening to like country music and like they knew English. And I was like, why at home? Like my parents are listening to corridos and banda. Like I just didn't like understand sort of like that difference.
Yeah.
Like Brenda, I also, I went to school not knowing English. And then I also, because my parents moved us when I was about 5 years old, but they took forever to enroll me in kindergarten for some reason. So I didn't start school until like April, when most of the kids in kindergarten had already kind of like learned like basic English and things like that. And I was kind of like just left and like super behind and not knowing how to speak English. So I relate a lot to what Brenda was just saying right now about like my pronunciation not being the best. Actually, for me, Brenda, I know you were talking, this made me think of me. It was Massachusetts. Like we would have to read out loud in books, like in history books, and sometimes our teachers would make us read. And I hated like when that word would come up, like it just intimidated, made me nervous. Like till this day, when I think about it, I'm like, am I going to pronounce it correctly? So that was something that I very much like related to what you were saying as well. And I guess to add a little bit too, like I was saying, I grew up in sort of like this ranch country culture. So I grew up doing 4-H when I was younger. And it was just this weird like dynamic too, because like my dad was very supportive. So to provide a little bit of context about that, like I would show pigs and like cows at the fair when I was younger, and my dad would, you know, help me with all of that. But every time we would go to any of those events, I feel like folks would question like my dad's ability to do things, or they would just automatically assume that he didn't speak English, and they would like try to talk to him in their choppy Spanish and things like that. So those types of experiences, it made me feel like I wasn't like good enough for sort of like my community, because I was super involved in what they saw as kind of like this white culture. But then I wasn't like good enough for them either, because I didn't look like they did. And I spoke Spanish, my English was choppy. So I always had this like sort of like stress that I didn't really know where I belonged.
Mhm.
And because of that, like, I feel like I was afraid to like I said, like, I listened to banda. I still really enjoy like listening to that. But I felt like I kind of almost felt forced to kind of like hide those things that I liked.
Mhm.
And I had to like pretend or like feel like I could only show certain aspects of me, and vice versa. For my friends that were Hispanic and stuff, if I would tell them I listened to country and stuff, like, they would make fun of me or like make me feel like I wasn't good enough for that. So yeah, I feel like that's a lot of what I'll probably share has to do with like just kind of feeling like I didn't really belong everywhere. Like, I didn't speak English good enough. I didn't speak Spanish good enough, and kind of just feeling like I didn't belong, and not having, I think, like a lot of my family members or having community in the town that I had also impacted me in that sense, until I really went to college and I was able to kind of like hang out or like meet people that looked like me, had similar ideas of me, similar experiences. It wasn't really until then that I feel like I really became more proud in my culture. One last thing that I'll add, just because we talked about it a little bit earlier, was my name. So my name, when you read my name, everyone really says Edith. And I was very lucky that in like 4th grade, I had a teacher who just came up to me one day and he's like, do you want me to say your name in Edith? Or do you want me to say Edith, which was like the closest thing in his way to my name, Edith. And I was like, you know what? No one's ever asked me that. So I just went from there on, I went as Edith. And everyone even though everyone was predominantly white and like spoke English, they would pronounce my name that way. But then I went to high school and I tried that. None of my teachers like got it. They really didn't even try. So I kind of just gave up on it and I just went with Edith. In college, I also didn't really try. So it really wasn't until I actually came back to UC Merced when her name was Ariana at the time. She served as the coordinator for service for undocumented students. And I don't really remember how it came up, but I kind of mentioned it to her and she's like, you know what, you should reclaim your name. And I'm like, yeah, it is such, like, I think to me, it's such an important part of me. Just, I don't like it pronounced the other way. Like, I don't really identify with it. So I started reclaiming my name and everybody in the office now calls me that. Students have a little bit of a difficult time sometimes, but my student staff is really good about reminding them, no, it's not Edith, it's Edith. Yeah, but I think just that example kind of just shows sort of like my struggle with like not really knowing where, or like not really being like knowing how to speak up for myself and like knowing how to speak up for my culture in that way until later on in my life.
No, I think that's a great example, especially in what you shared in regards to sometimes, names aren't necessarily something that like, I remember people would try to get, even as an adult, like I remember working for the county and someone said, oh, I can't pronounce Yesenia. Can we just create a nickname for you? And I was like, no, if I have to remember your name, which was like Lewis something, like I couldn't even like say her name. And then I'm like, so you can remember my name. But it is something that we have to work towards, right? To educating people, because if we go out of our way to learn their names, it's common courtesy and respect that, we are seen and we are visible and we have the right to choose the pronunciation of our name. So I'm glad that you're reclaiming it, and I will go ahead and start using Edith, because there's times I think where I've called you Edith too, because that's what I just made that assumption. But I think it's important, and I'm glad that you're using this platform also to educate us on the importance of names. So I'm going to move us on into the next question. So thank you for sharing and talking about your family, and as well as I think it's important that you also talked about the Central Valley, right? Because oftentimes a lot of people think that the Central Valley is very diverse, but I ran into the fact that when I moved here, you don't hear a lot of people speaking Spanish out in the community. It's now, I think we got recently, the city of Merced, we have the marketplace, or it's like a cultural festivities that happen on the first Thursday of every month through the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, which is great. But thank you for acknowledging that about the community, right? That if we are trying to learn or we're trying to maintain our cultural heritage, we have to do some extra work, right? So that's important. So thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and move us to our next question that I will go ahead and ask Brenda to share. How has your cultural identity shaped your career or any experiences in higher education? That could be in college or now that you're employed. If you can share how your cultural identity has shaped or has influenced your higher ed experience or your experience right now working for UC Merced.
Yeah, I mean, this could be like 5 hours of me talking, but the main thing that I wanted to talk about was about the work ethic that my parents taught me about, because sometimes work against me, because I feel like my parents were always like, you need to keep your head down, you know, you listen to instructions, you always say yes, and you try not to make problems. So I feel like because of this fear that I have of being signaled out, and it has happened where I will disagree with something or I will give my opinions and you become that person that's like, oh, there she goes again with her comments, oh, there she goes again, you know, is talking about students. And it really sucks to become signaled out. And when I tell stuff to my parents, they're like, you need to shut up. Like, that's how my dad speaks to me, like, cállate and, you know, put your head down. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. So I feel like sometimes they also see me as like, oh, she always causes trouble, but it's not causing trouble. And now I'm older, I'm in my late 20s, so I feel that I'm more secure in myself, like I said before. But when I first started at 22 working in higher education, I would question myself and say, do I need to stay quiet? Like, do I need to just show up to work and go home? And if I see like discrimination or I see people's just like wrong ideas that they have about what students really deal with and think about, then I don't know, like it's really frustrating. It made me feel that my parents weren't supporting me or my family. But like now I understand that's how they've survived. It's been a survival skill for them that they go to work and, you know, like not cause any problems. And I've also been trying to work with them to not be taken advantage of, because that's something that I realized that sometimes I would skip my breaks and I would just work the whole time. Or like if they would say, do you want to volunteer for this? Like it's not paid. And I'd be like, well, okay, like you asked me to, so I'm gonna do it. And I think that for a lot of first generation students that become staff members or just in any field, doesn't have to be higher ed, we're so used to this idea of, you know, being quiet, not being a troublemaker, even though you're not, and working as hard as you can, even if they don't pay you, work that extra hour, do this just so they could see value in you. And we don't have to do that. Like you could just do your actual work, do the best that you can, and don't stress yourself out. Because I mean, we're going to be working the rest of our lives into retirement. You could get worn out really fast.
Yeah, no, that's great advice that you're giving. You're already giving advice. At the end, we're going to ask you to give advice, but that's perfect because I think that work ethic can become problematic in this type of setting because we can then, you know, why people will start, you know, feeling tired or they're not being recognized for the above and beyond, right? Because there's a certain point of, yes, you're going above and beyond, but then exploitation can happen. And so I'm glad that you're talking about that because unfortunately, you know, I know growing up as well, it was always like, keep your head down, don't be visible, right? You got to keep moving forward because a lot of trauma that our parents maybe have gone through or have experienced or witnessed. And so they're teaching us what they think we need to survive. But the reality is like what you're saying, that we can speak up and it's not that, you know, we have choices, right? You know, we are fortunate that we are now in a place where we have choices as being college educated folks. So I'm glad you mentioned that. It's really powerful. Thank you, Brenda. So I'm gonna move us forward with Edith in order to talk a little bit about maybe other information that you can share regarding how your cultural identity has shaped your career or any experiences that you've had in higher ed or in your college education as well.
It's really hard going after Brenda because she touched on something that I wanted to touch on. But I guess I'll just share for me, I think I had a lot of supportive people in my life growing up. I mean, starting really with my parents, and like my dad would always say that the best inheritance that he would ever leave us was an education. He's like, I don't know if I'm even going to be able to pay for it, but he's like, the fact that I'm instilling the fact that you have to go to college is going to be the one thing I'm going to leave you with. And the same thing for me and my sister. So I'm also the oldest of, I'm the oldest of 3. So I have 2 younger sisters, and the same thing with all of us. So I always knew that like college was going to be something I was going to do. I didn't know how. My parents had no idea kind of how to help me get there, but I knew I was going to do it. And I had a lot of like supportive folks growing up, like in you know, the school that I went to the same school because Snelling is such a small town. It was K through 8th grade, like less than 100 students, which in a way served to my benefit, I feel, because I feel like I had that extra attention from like teachers that kind of like paid attention and just kind of saw something in me really that I probably didn't see in myself at the time. So I was very lucky to have that. Not so much the same thing in high school. High school was like a completely different thing, I think, which I was kind of like a shock for me because I went from like again, like less than 100 students to I came to Merced High where just my class itself was like 500 students and students from so many different like diverse backgrounds. Like I finally found people that I could relate to. But even then I was like in AP classes. I could, like Brenda said, I could talk about this forever, but I was in AP classes and it was sort of like this weird thing because I think some of it had to do that, of course, they had gone to school together, they knew each other, but I always just felt like they knew what was like in terms of like what was going on in society. They were listening to the same music. They had like these jokes that I didn't understand. So I always kind of like didn't feel like I belonged. And my counselor at the time kind of was like, even though I was like in some AP classes, I wasn't in other ones. And I remember it was predominantly like my math class. I can't remember. I think it was trig that I wasn't doing so well. And my counselor was like, yeah, like, you know, I don't really know if you should be applying to like, you know, college really. She was really encouraging community college. Not that there's anything wrong with it either, but I was kind of set on like, no, I want to, you know, go to a 4-year institution. And I kind of didn't have the support during the time to get there. Somehow I got lucky enough to like get there. So high school, I didn't have the best experience. But then going on to college, I had professors that would like write little notes on my like papers and say like, you know, I think your work is worthy of like going to grad school. And if like, I had no idea what grad school was in the moment. Like I thought like you just graduate from college and that's it. Like I didn't know there was different degrees that you could get. Any of that. So if it weren't for the professors that were writing these little notes on my papers and stuff, then I wouldn't have had the courage to go ask them. Because similar to Brenda, like I saw professors and teachers as authority figures, like you don't question them, you kind of just do what they say sort of thing. So for me, the fact that they were writing notes on my paper, like it made me comfortable enough to like go and like, hey, like I saw that you did, you know, you wrote this on my paper. Can you kind of like, you know, explain what this is? And that's how like they kind of explained what grad school was. They explained the difference between a master's and a PhD program. And it really was thanks to their help that I was able to then go into grad school. Even then though, not really knowing some things, like I also didn't know that I could have gone into a different program. Like I thought because I had done sociology as an undergrad, I had to do sociology in grad school. So that's kind of like the only option that I thought I had. And that's what I did. I don't regret it, but I do think I might have done things a little bit differently if I would have had sort of, you know, more accurate information, or if I would at least known what questions to ask. Because I think that's another thing. Sometimes like, because you don't know, you don't even know what questions to ask. So yeah, it was really thanks to that. And it wasn't until grad school then that I was like, I still trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I was like, I'm about to graduate and I don't even know yet, like what jobs to apply to. Academia didn't seem like the thing that I wanted to do because I felt like it was like a lot of pressure and like, it was such a different like environment too, going from Stan State to UNR, because at Stan State, there was so many students that like looked like me, had similar experiences, and especially in a sociology class, like we were able to share those experiences. So I felt like super heard. And going into grad school, like in Reno, it was like a really different story. The students didn't look like me. It was just different. Like, I really suffered from imposter syndrome that first month. Like, I was like, I'm not good enough for this. I can't be here. I called my mom actually, and I was crying. I'm like, I think I can't do this anymore. Like, I don't want to be here. And I now know her intentions were good, but what she said was, I knew it. Like, I told your dad not to let you go, but like, yeah. And that I remember like just crying that. And just because of that comment, I was like, you know what? I'm going to prove her wrong. I can do it, and I'm going to stay here. And that's really what motivated me to stay and like do it. Yeah. And I graduated. But during that time, it's kind of when I figured out that like, hey, like I want to be someone that supports other students like me. Like I said, I had so many people supporting me throughout my journey. And if it wasn't for them, I really wouldn't have been able to like really be where I am today. However, most of those people didn't look like me. They didn't have my same experiences and my same background. So I think that was one of the things that motivated me to like get into higher education and get into the career that I am, because I wanted to also be not just someone that supported the students, but I also wanted to, bring my experiences and my culture with me. And so that students could also identify with me. And yeah, that's really why I ended up where I am. And I try to bring that into the things that I share, like when I'm talking to students, like, trying to connect with them. Like I do share, like I listen to banda or certain things. And it's so cool, like it's even liberating for me at this point, because I didn't share those experiences back then, and having that opportunity to do it now is pretty cool. But yeah.
Wow. Thank you. No, that's really important. I'm glad that you touched on a lot of things in regards to probably validating for a lot of students that maybe came from an environment that, people didn't look like them, or even the fact that right now, unfortunately, a lot of our faculty don't look like our students. So it's, I think, a phenomenal thing that staff, can look like them. And so talking about imposter syndrome is also important, because I think it is something that our students will experience at least once, as they move into their careers, especially, depending, if they're just in careers that don't necessarily have a lot of raza or folks that look like them, right? But it's important that you also touched on support, right? The people that were supporting you and kind of giving you, the support to really get to where you are and where you went. But we have another question that's going to talk about support systems. So we can maybe move into that a little bit more, but I'm really thankful for you and sharing and kind of that passion for the work that you're doing right now, right? What's motivating you, which is the students and wanting to make a difference. So that's great. So I'm going to move us on into a next question, which I think both you, Brenda, and Edith have touched on a little bit about challenges, right? But can you share, Brenda, how you deal with challenges, microaggressions, or any kind of discrimination? How did you overcome it? Because I think that's going to be really critical to give some potential tips to students in regards to what does it look like? Because sometimes we can be experiencing a microaggression or discrimination. We just don't realize it, right? So maybe if you can highlight an example and then kind of how you overcame it would be great.
Yeah, and that's a really hard question. I feel that just regardless of how much we stand up for ourselves and try to do things differently, like there's always going to be people around us that don't take us seriously just because of our last names, what we look like. And to me, it's really been finding community and other people like myself so we could like support each other. So like if someone tells me a comment, I don't always have to be the first one to react, because I feel like there would be times where like people would like, I don't know, like call me the wrong name or like touch my hair. I don't know, like just have really curly hair if you want to touch it. And I would be frustrated with myself because I would freeze and like I wouldn't know what to say, and I would just be like, oh, okay, bye, and just try to walk away. And then once I would go home or like later on when I was sitting at my desk, I would be so angry at myself, like, why didn't you tell that person something back? Like, why didn't you defend yourself? And I think this goes back to talking about identity, with some of us, like we do have family that for survival, they've learned to minimize themselves. And I feel like sometimes that's still a little bit in me where I don't know how to react. So I try to minimize myself and run away. And finding community and other people like myself, they will tell me like, it's okay, like it's not your fault if you freeze. It's not your fault if you don't know how to react. And I feel like that's the first step, trying to remove blame for yourself because of people's bad actions. Like there's nothing about you that warrants abuse or aggression from anyone else. And for a few years, anytime that I'm in a new space, I try to find someone else that I feel thinks like me or is positive to me, and I'll go like sit with them if I'm in a new space. So then also standing up for other people. Like there was the times where someone would say something about my coworker and I will stand up for them. I'd be like, hey, that's not cool. Like you cannot say that about this person. So then I remove that action from them. So like they could sit there and freeze if they have to at that moment. And then like if they wanted to also defend themselves, they can. So then next time that happened to me, like I was in a meeting and like I kept saying my opinion and they ignored me. And then like 5 minutes later, a white man said my opinion. And everybody was like, that's such a great idea. Why did none of us think about that? And my coworker said, Brenda said that verbatim 5 minutes ago. And you all ignored her. And then like all of them in the meeting froze. And we're like, oh, we just don't remember her saying that. So then I stood up for myself and said, no, I did say that. But I feel that it was having that community and that other person to kind of like give me that little nudge of like, I'm with you. You don't have to sit there and question yourself if you're right. Where I was able to stand up for myself. And I know that not all of us are lucky to have another person with us, but I feel that for myself, at least I've been trying to talk to other people, be like, oh, you think like me? Okay, like let's figure out things. And before I end, I think another thing has just been talking to older people, that people with more experience. So I will talk like I've joined, like staff and faculty of color and like RISE, another group that we had for staff and faculty, where I would go ask people like Jasenia and like Latrice, and I'll ask them like, how do you deal with this? Or this happened to me at work. I'm not sure how to react. And even if they don't have the answers, like I always feel like it was just nice to talk to someone else and hearing about each other's experiences.
Great examples. Gracias, Brenda. I really appreciate it because I think it's really important to know, your support system, but to know, again, that practice and also the importance of what you mentioned, that validating that whatever reaction you have is important, because then it prevents some of that, for us to carry on some of that negative stuff that really isn't ours, but it's other people's. So, and I'm glad that you mentioned about, seeking out, mentors or seeking out folks that are a little bit older that can kind of share their experience, because I think that's the key, is looking for that community, right? So very excited and thankful that you shared that, because I think a lot of our students here, it's about that network, right? And so we have another question a little bit to talk about that, but I'm glad you started us off on that. So thank you. So Edith, we have the same question. Anything that you can share about how you deal with challenges, microaggressions, discrimination? How do you overcome it?
Yeah, this is a hard question. I think Brenda honestly touched on most of what I would have said too. I think for me, it is also having community and having like colleagues that like look like me, sound like me, think like me, or, combination of two. Yeah, like I know we have, for lack of a better way to put it, sometimes we'll have these like venting sessions, but then we'll also sort of like figure out together, how do we approach this next time? I agree with what Brenda was saying. I also like freeze up when things happen. And it's really a lot easier for me to stand up for someone else than stand up for myself. I feel like it's easier for me to recognize when it's happening to someone else. So that's why I'm also very thankful to have folks that like can like say something. I mean, the example that you provided, Brenda, that literally happened to me like 2 weeks ago too. And I was so frustrated because I was like, I said the same thing and now it's a great idea when someone else says it. Like, yeah. So just having someone that you could talk to afterwards, reaching out for mentors. I also think that that's one of my highest advice too. And I think for me, it was a little bit difficult at the beginning first, like asking for that, because I grew up like thinking or seeing like asking for help as sort of like a failure. So for me, it's one of those things that I feel like I'm working on. But having those mentors has been super helpful, and just just validation, accountability for me too, because sometimes I get all like, frustrated because something happened and I come up with all these ideas about, what I'm going to do to like help with it. But, when it comes down to it, I get nervous or something happens. So just having someone that I talk to that can hold me accountable as well, so that I can go through with whatever I said that I was going to do, whether that be report or have a conversation with someone. Sometimes it's something also, I've gone to like the Office of Ombuds a couple of times. That has been super helpful in helping me think through my options and things like that when it's happened on campus. So I guess like looking for your resources is another, another way that I do it. And I think Brenda also touched on this too. I think for me, I'm a big processor. So sometimes it really just requires for me to like think about it afterwards. And that's helpful for me to recognize that I'm not the one that is to blame. Because sometimes I think when things happen, like I take it very personally and I feel like I did something wrong, or it's my fault that so-and-so made this comment. So for me, like reflecting on it and really like recognizing where that comes from, I think is really helpful for me to be able to move forward with it. So I really appreciate that, Brenda, you brought that up. But yeah, I think those are just some examples. Another thing, this doesn't really answer the question, but I guess it does in a way, because I think it's helpful for me too, is like me having that knowledge of that experience, like I try to implement that into the work that I do with students, and particularly student staff, and since I'm kind of in that supervisor role. So I've done, for trainings, we do things on like burnout. We talk about that. We talk about how like context like influences that. And a lot of that is influenced by the experiences that I've had in work, because like Brenda touched on earlier, like I had a hard time saying no, where I felt like if I said no, they were going to like overlook me. And I almost felt like I had to work harder than other people. So I try to take those experiences too and try to implement that into the training that I do with students, because those are things I wish that I would have had. And I didn't really have it. So I'm trying to also pass on that knowledge. And I think in that it too is kind of healing for me too. Just kind of knowing that I'm passing that information on.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I'm actually going to stick with you for the next question, which is what does your support system look like? And maybe if you can share, because I loved how you talked about resources, you talked about the importance of mentorship, but maybe if you can talk a little bit about how your support system has changed and evolved over the years, because I think that's going to be really critical, because of what you touched on, the fact that sometimes we're raised to not ask for help, right? That's a weakness. That's something that, you have to do it on your own. No le preguntes a nadie, tú lo puedes hacer. But the reality is, a lot of other cultures, a lot of other folks ask for help and is seen as something of empowerment, right? So let's reclaim it, right? That we can ask for support. So can you share a little bit about your support system? What does it look like now, or has it looked like in the past?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I touched on it a little bit. I think my family is still like one of my huge like support system. Maybe they don't understand everything that's going on, but like just being able to kind of have someone to go to. My sisters, I mentioned I'm the oldest of two older sisters, so they're also actually in very similar like careers as well. One of them is she just got her master's in counseling, and my younger sister's going back to school too, and she's going to work in education. So I feel like having kind of those conversations, like I think family is first. But then, like I mentioned, also colleagues and being able to have those folks that I can kind of vent to that are going through similar experiences. But something that I was going to add to that, I think, is that at least the way that I used to see like mentorship or support system before, I used to feel like it was like one person that like I would have to go for like everything. But I think like what I realize now is like I have different people that I go to for different things. And I think like that's important to recognize. I think sometimes like I have a particular person that I go to when these things happen, or someone that I think like will understand this sort of thing. And then I go to someone else for that. So I think like it's not just one necessarily person, but I kind of have different folks that I kind of tap into for different things. Yeah, I think that answers your question.
No, you did. And that's something that it would be almost like the trend, the words that people use right now are board of directors, a board of directors in your life where you have different people that play different roles in your life, but all of it is to try to help you advance and move forward in your career. So I'm glad that you mentioned that about the importance of knowing that it's okay to have various people that you go to for support, that it's not just one person, but you have multiple and you have options. I think that's the key. So I thank you for sharing that. It's really critical that it's okay for those that are going to be listening to this to know that it's okay to ask multiple people to mentor or to, to ask for support. That, asking for more doesn't mean that, it's a weakness, but again, it's a strength. So I appreciate you sharing that. We're going to move on to Brenda to see what is your support system look like? Anything else that you can add that maybe Edith covered, or anything that you want to share with us?
Yeah, I have really similar ideas too with going to people for different things. I used to like go ask like my main friend and be like, this is what I'm frustrated about. She'll be like, I don't understand. Because we work in different fields.
Yeah.
So like, and like my partner's a social worker. So like when I would go to him, like he talks more about relationships and like how to fix that or how am I feeling. So I've learned that when I'm really frustrated, I need someone to talk to about how I'm feeling. Like I go to my partner, how I'm feeling. If I'm frustrated about my career and like the next steps, I'm gonna go to my friends that work in higher ed or my mentors in higher ed. Like, why am I talking to my teacher friend about higher education jobs? They're like, I don't understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like I think you're gonna be great in everything you do. And
Mhm.
sometimes I need that, but other times I'm like, no, like, do I want to stay in student affairs? Like, do I want to work in like career services or something? And I had to like step back and realize that like my friends or my support system doesn't know what's in my brain and everything I'm thinking.
Mhm.
Like in their head, I'm an amazing person that could do anything I put my head to,
Mhm.
and that's great because we need that, but also like knowing when to go to someone else when you want like a real answer that's not like I love you, you're gonna do great. And also just getting mentors either through professional associations has been helpful, or like joining clubs. Like you, even after college, you could still be in associations and committees. So I feel like that's been also helpful because then I get to hear other people, even if we're not maybe super close, but once in a while we talk about like professional stuff and I get to have that as an example. And I think just in general, my support system has really changed. In undergrad, it was just like me and my friends wanting to have fun and supporting each other once in a while. And I feel like now that it's been a few years since I graduated, it's slowly changing into more of like, how do we support each other when we only see each other once a year or like once every few months? And do you want support through text message? Do you want to do a FaceTime? And I feel like as we get older, people have more responsibilities. And I've been seeing like my friendship group change a little bit. And I'm also having to go elsewhere for support. And that's okay. Like it's okay to ask for help. And sometimes I used to be scared of networking. I would be so scared of going to someone and being like, hey, like, can I sit with you and have lunch? Or can I sit with you and talk to you about like career stuff? And I really had to push myself to reach out to people and ask for help, because if not, you're just going to sit there confused, and it's going to, a decision that could have been taking you a month if you talk to the right people could take you a year, because you're sitting there doubting yourself when other people are ready to mentor you, they're ready to help you. Like, don't be afraid to ask for help.
Perfect. That's really important. And I'm glad that you also talked about the importance of like professional associations, because oftentimes we don't realize that there's different, there's cultural or different affinity groups out there that are in higher education. There's conferences where you can go that are specific for our community, which is, I think, really important. That again, there is a network, but we have to push ourselves a little bit. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that. And so one of the things is, as we're coming to time right now, I'm actually going to highlight both of you to kind of think about what's some advice? We're going to get to the last question. What advice would you give to undergrad students? I know that you shared a lot of tidbits of, of things that I think are really critical and important, but just taking into account in our last 8 minutes or so, any advice that you think would be critical, that you think would have made a difference receiving if you were an undergrad would be great. And I'll leave it up to whoever wants to go first. Just unmute yourself. So if you need a little bit of extra time to think, that the time is there as well. Don't be too polite. Whenever you're ready, Edith, go for it.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I mean, a lot of it has to do with the things that we talked about already. I mean, for me, like I mentioned, like I was really afraid to ask for help. So definitely like ask for help whenever you need it. Like now I know like the worst thing that they can happen is someone tells you no, and you are literally in the same place that you were before you asked the question. And if you could gain so much from it as well. So definitely that. I think also, and I read this in a book and it's like one of my favorite quotes, but like I mentioned earlier, I feel like imposter syndrome has like gotten to me a couple of times in undergrad, grad school, and even as a professional. So I like to always think about this quote, which is like making a mistake is not the same thing as being a mistake. Because I think sometimes when things happen, at least for me, again, I would kind of put the blame on me and like, oh, I made this mistake and it's all on me and I have to like, figure out how to fix it and all that. But I also feel like I have now learned to kind of reframe that and learn that I'm going to grow from it as well. So I think that's also like one of my biggest advice. And I think it's something that I try to think of when things happen to me, kind of just taking that step back and like reflecting on it so that I can, move forward with what's happening. And then the last thing I think that I'll share is just kind of like, also just embracing who you are. I think like the perspectives and the experiences that you have make you who you are, and they make you a great like candidate for whatever is going on, whether you're applying to, grad school in your futures or you're doing a career or whatever. Just embrace who you are and bring that with you. Like I said, I think that was something that I sort of struggled for a while because I kind of was like in these two different worlds and I couldn't I feel like I could only be one to like fit into a specific like group or, but, I'm recognizing that like all of those things are me and they make me who I am. And they give me the perspectives that I have. So yeah, just embrace that and be who you are.
Perfect. Gracias. Well said. I appreciate that. It's a good quote as well. Gracias. Brenda?
Yeah, I think pretty much everything that Edith said. I think that you really have to work on just loving yourself and everything about yourself. And a lot of the stuff that we question about ourselves are because we're subconscious, whether it be about speaking up about your identity, like telling people this is the kind of job that I want, or just being scared for your future. I think once you're secure in yourself, like this is who I am, this is the things I like to do, things kind of begin to fall into place. And this is something that I've been learning. So I'm in the same boat where I don't believe in myself sometimes. And it took into like my partner was telling me like, you tell yourself like horrible stuff like that you suck, that you can't do this, that like who's gonna, like that you're gonna fail. And he's like, if you heard your friends saying that about themselves, what would be your reaction? And I'm like, my friends are amazing. Like, why would they think that? And he's like, people think that about you too. And I think it was anytime that I think of myself negatively, I'm like, what do you say that to your friend, to your partner, to like someone you admire? What do you tell them? Like, no one's going to want to hire you. Like, no, you would never say that to them. So why do you say that to yourself? And like so many times, I feel like a lot of us are kind of like conditioned to be like very loving, nurturing people. And that's great about us, but you should do that internally too. And it's a process, like it's taking me years. I'm 27 now and I'm still working on that. But I think to me, it's just really value yourself and everything you're doing and remind yourself that you're doing your best. Just because your friend bought a house or your friend got this job that pays this much, like they're traveling, they're doing this, it doesn't mean that you're not succeeding in life. You're just in a different path. And, everybody has different paths in their life. you know, different achievements, and you're doing great. You know, another person looks at you and goes, wow, like, let's see, like someone's looking at Ashley saying, damn, Ashley's doing like X, Y, and Z. I wish I was doing that. And then Ashley's looking at Marcelino like, I want to be doing that too. So just remember that everything's going to come your way. Find support system. You know, like imposter syndrome happens to all of us, but then there's people like us that just want to support you. And I'm sure like if you ever want to like have lunch with me or talk to me, send me an email. I will answer any questions you have. So that's my last bit. Once you meet someone, message them. Like as I said, the worst I could say is no or not reply to you. I can hear you saying.
Perfect. I appreciate you sharing that. Can you hear me? Pretty
Yes.
good? Okay. So I think that's really important because I think one of the things is about just having the strength to actually reach out, right? And actually knowing your self-worth and your self-love, I think is really critical. So I'm glad that you also touched on that, because I think that's one of the key things where we don't bring in love or self-love into the professional realm, but it is critical and it's important that we talk about these emotions. So it's really critical. But you know, we're already coming to the end. And so I just wanted to go ahead and pause and say thank you for doing this, because again, the Firme role models, it's really an opportunity for students to get to know staff here at UC Merced, but also to know that there's people like them that maybe, you know, you've touched on some of, you know, other people's shared stories, right? That maybe that happened to me or that's how I felt, to validate that you're not alone, and to validate that being part of the, you know, Hispanic, Latino, Chicano X Heritage Month is not just 1 month, right? From September 15th to October 15th. We live it, you know, 24/7, 365 days out of the year. So it's important to know that it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of bravery to really come forth and be your authentic self. And so I'm thankful and I'm glad that we have you as great mentors and as part of the community, and students can reach out to you. We also are going to be uploading this again, so folks are seeing it on YouTube. And then at any point, if students want to reach out to you, we're asking them if they can email us, and then we'll put them in contact with you. Because I think, you know, if you're a resource and you're here on campus, folks need to utilize you. Just to have a walking meeting or have lunch with somebody, you know, really small little ask are pretty doable. So we're hoping that that can happen. But again, thank you. Muchas gracias. Les agradezco su tiempo. I appreciate your time. You are wonderful Firme role models, and we look forward to all the great things that you'll be doing on campus and all the great connections that you'll be doing after this. So gracias.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank
Adios.
you.